Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Alan Eustace, who will be giving the talk today. Many of you know Alan. Alan was Chusseau last fall, and that means that he was the head of our practice period. He's been a student at Zen Center for a long time. I can't remember exactly how long, but he's been a priest in training under my tutelage for at least 4 years. And he's given talks on Tuesdays. He led the practice period in the fall. He is originally from Ireland. He lives in Berkeley. And I'm just very happy to introduce him today. He's good. He's good. So welcome out.
Thanks, Tim, and great to be here. You can all hear me okay? Yes, wonderful. All right. Well, great to be here with you virtually, beaming in from Oakland, California. It sounds very exotic to say that, beaming in. So yeah, it's wonderful to be virtually in Minnesota, or maybe you're here and I'm there. Who knows? But wonderful to be with you. I will say this is a very auspicious day if you're an Irish person who cares about language or words at all, because it's Bloomsday, which is the 16th of June. It's the day on which James Joyce's book Ulysses was set. So,
oh, you lost your voice, lost your audio here.
Okay, I think I'm.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, this is not a talk about Ulysses or James Joyce, but there might be a few references in here. So what I wanted to share today, and let me say first of all, what I'm going to share is really my, I will say my experience, my strength, my hope in practice, and consider it as an encouragement for your own practice. So if it's helpful, wonderful. If it's not helpful, just feel free to forget it instantly and don't worry about it. And see this as an opportunity for some extra zazen. And what I wanted to talk about today is kind of what I think of, at least for me, has become kind of, I'm calling it the secret of Zen practice. And I love how on the internet these days, there's all sorts of clickbait articles, this one weird trick that will unlock everything for you. Or doctors can't believe that if you do this thing and you click on it and then you click and you click and you click, you never get the answer. So I will share the secret, the so-called secret with you. You've probably read it before and didn't even notice it. But it's something that I found really helpful. And of course, it's much like all good Zen things, it's much closer to hand, much nearer than we might have thought. But before I get into that, I wanted to set a little bit of context because I think it's helpful, at least for me, to frame why this so-called secret is important. And the kind of context I wanted to set is around this idea of an inner critic and also what we are schooled for. And it's my experience that so many people I meet, whether it's through practice or in the world, have a fervent inner critic or judge or tyrant or dictator, or insert your word of choice, that shows up in varying ways at varying degrees of strength. I also notice a lot of talk these days of imposter syndrome, which I think is another manifestation of that. And what struck me is that if our practice is in service of an inner critic or judge or tyrant, it can leave us kind of hollow and empty because we're kind of being driven by this inner place or part or person that is kind of insatiable. So what I'll share with you, I think, can help with this a lot. It certainly helped me. I do want to share a little bit of my own kind of experience with this to sort of humanize it a bit. And I in my teens and kind of for a number of years, writing and language and literature really opened my eyes and kind of opened my heart to all sorts of possibilities. And it started actually with kind of an English teacher who um, was an interesting character who wrote fake reviews for shows that didn't exist. He was a sort of a journalist on the side, and so it kind of, I think he was disgruntled with the paper he worked for, so would write these fake reviews. Anyway, I got really interested in writing, and for many years would write, but this part of me that I guess it was trying to be helpful set this bar that I had to attain, which was, you know, James Joyce's Ulysses, or you know, Sylvia Plath, or insert author here. And that was kind of the bar that was constantly held. So everything I did was kind of, you know, mangled through this excruciating inner narrative. And I think it's probably one of the things that brought me to practice in the first place. And so I found some ways to kind of to work through that. And, you know, I'm happy to say that in many respects, it hasn't fully gone away, but it has eased a lot. And I found more ways to be with that. So that's one thing I wanted to share, that I think a lot of us have this in us. And I think practice can really help if we approach it with this sort of thing I want to share with you in mind. The other thing I want to share is I feel like, at least in my experience, that we are schooled, and I'm using that word advisedly or intentionally, we are schooled for, in many respects, for achievement, for attainment, for, you know, you might say perfection, for being better than, can be a lot of comparison. And, you know, it's great to bring energy to things we care about and to, you know, pour ourselves into something. But again, if it's in service of some sense of attainment that's really about something in us that is never going to be satisfied, it can also leave us hollow. You know, when I first came to, you know, meditation practice, and, you know, practiced in Zen and then practiced for a number of years in Tibetan Buddhism. And when I first encountered that, when I first encountered Zen, I was just like, I'm going to sit and sit and sit until I get this, and I'm going to crack this thing. And we're just going to like figure it out. You can imagine how that went. But in spite of myself, all sorts of wonderful things started to happen. So in spite of that part of me that wanted to do that. And then when I first encountered Tibetan Buddhism and the tradition I practiced in, there was a lot of emphasis on learning and study and really understanding, and a lot of focus on sort of fairly hefty philosophical texts. And I like to read, and I like, you know, I like these kinds of pursuits. So I was like, okay, this is great. I'm gonna like just study this, and I'm gonna get it, and I'm just gonna like learn all the things, and then I'm gonna like arrive, and, you know, whatever I had in mind. And what I found was I started, although I actually found lots of helpful things, and I learned a lot from it, but it did just tighten me up into more of a knot of sort of striving, and it was stressful, and kind of wasn't really seeing the, you know, the promised results of, you know, that I was expecting. So at some point, I started to notice my teacher at the time, my Tibetan teacher, uh, he would talk about sort of, you know, learning and practice, but like really was a very simple and humble and kind person, and would be out there literally chopping wood, like chopping firewood, and then, you know, mopping the floor and washing the dishes, and laughing at the cat who entered the meditation room, because that's kind of like how that would roll. Or the three-legged dog, there was a three-legged dog that would kind of wander into the meditation room. I think one of the dogs actually maybe got sick in the meditation room, and, you know, peals of laughter. So carried all of this very lightly. And so I started to learn from folks who had been traveling this path longer than me, but maybe there was another way of approaching it. And I will say I've learned a lot of this from Tim too, but I'm not going to embarrass him now because he's here. So I want to talk about, well, what is this so-called secret that I found really helpful. And as I've been reflecting on this in the last couple of years in particular, and looking for sort of sources that back it up, and I was struck how, so in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and this is one of my, you know, favorite practice books. I purchased this in, I think, like 1999, and I must have read the prologue, you know, countless times. And there is this piece in the prologue where, with some light editing on my part, just if you jump across some paragraphs, he says, we're talking about the beginner's mind. The beginner's mind is the mind of compassion. Skip 2. It is the secret of Zen practice. I was like, what? How have I not seen this before? The mind of compassion is the secret of Zen practice. And I guess seems almost, obvious to say it this way, but what really struck me, and the nuance I wanted to add to that is, seems really important to bring that kind of kindness to ourselves. So compassion and kindness, but really cultivating self-kindness or self-compassion. And I want to share some other ways of talking about that I found helpful. And I guess the other thing I want to say is, of course, in our tradition, we talk about the combination of maybe compassion and wisdom, or we might say kindness and clarity, or tenderness and knowing. So it seems like the combination of both of these are really helpful because, of course, when we bring kindness to ourselves, we also want to have our eyes open and be aware of how we're showing up and the parts of ourselves that are coming into play and how those show up in interactions with other people. It's why other people can be very helpful in this journey. So I wanted to, just as we go through this, I want to offer you a couple of symbols that I found really helped me with this. And so when I think of kindness or that kind of self-kindness or self-compassion, which seems to be a real, really helpful force against that inner critic, the symbol I find really helpful is moonlight. That sort of soft, very gentle quality of light that emanates from moonlight. So that's the first symbol. The second one, I think about clarity or wisdom or knowing, is the notion of path. And so for me, what comes to mind is this image of a path that is, bathed in moonlight, this gentle light. You can kind of see a little bit maybe ahead of you, but not quite sure where it's going. And then the last image I want to share is the image of home, because of course we know in our tradition that the path, is always here. And somehow the journey is really just back to home in our body, heart, mind. So, there's no place like home, and there is no place to get to. And yet, it seemed like there's a path and a way that we continuously travel. So moonlight and path and home are some symbols that might help us. And a word that I've been playing with lately that I find really helps kind of encompass all of this is the word gentleness. And I say that because it's so easy to get hung up on words. Like for me, compassion, it's a beautiful word, but brings up, I feel a little bit like, okay, compassion, it's very serious. So I want to offer the word gentleness as a way of kind of playing with all of these and talk a little bit about that. There's a wonderful book called The Power of Gentleness. Sorry, I will say this. A lot of what I share today, I'm always looking for new language to explore and experience these concepts. So I love all of the Buddhist, sutras and things that I've read. And I'm also looking for other language that helps. So there's a book called The Power of Gentleness by a French psychoanalyst called Anne Dufour-Montel. And it's a really lovely book. It's quite a short book, and she unpacks this concept and the origins of it. And I found that phrase really interesting, the power of gentleness. And so she speaks to the ways in which this shows up and that it has this really interesting quiet power. I wanted to share a little thing she talks about. It's just one little quote from her. So she says, and she uses the phrase en douce, which is a French term kind of meaning like sliding in or like creeping in or, like sort of like finding its way into the conversation. So she says, sneaking in en douce, under the table, invisible. Gentleness lets itself be forgotten, as discreet and essential as a heartbeat. Leaving unnoticed, en douce, a narrow escape. Gentleness maintains a few exclusive affinities with secrecy, operating on the sly, en douce, taking orders from no one. There's another phrase that I found really helpful lately. I learned the phrase excessively gentle, and a question around how might we be excessively gentle with ourselves. So I want to share with you some other words that speak to this, and they're from the Irish author and poet John O'Donoghue. He was a Catholic priest, and then left the priesthood because really what he was exploring, I feel it's the same thing we explore in our practice, which is how to be fully real and here and awake and present and connected. And at some point he realized that the priesthood that he was part of wasn't allowing for that. And I just want to share these words with you that I feel really help speak to this. And so he says, "You have traveled too fast over false ground. Now your soul has come to take you back. Take refuge in your senses. Open up to all the small miracles you rushed through. Become inclined to watch the way of rain when it falls slow and free. Imitate the habit of twilight, taking time to open the well of color that fostered the brightness of day. Draw alongside the silence of stone until its calmness can claim you. Be excessively gentle with yourself. Stay clear of those vexed in spirit. Learn to linger around someone of ease who feels they have all the time in the world." And so I love that question, and how might we learn to be excessively gentle with ourselves? And what might that look like? What it brings to mind for me is well, what helps with that? And it's helped me to, as he says, linger around persons of ease. And so for some of us, as we seek to cultivate this in ourselves, some of us, it might be quite present already, but what's really helped me is finding people, and it could be, grandparents or elders, it could be friends, it could be teachers, it could be somebody imaginary. So sometimes in meditations I've done, it's been really helpful to imagine someone who represents that quality. And so one story I want to share with you, and this is more about like the gentleness and the kindness of a friend. When I was in school, I loved mathematics until about the age of, I don't know, 10, 11, something like that. Then I had a mathematics teacher who, let's just say this person and I did not get on, and I'm not quite sure why. I was 11, so, go figure. And I inherited this total mental block about mathematics. And I convinced myself, my phrase for the longest time was, I am terrible at maths. And so we call it maths in Ireland. So I'm terrible at math. I suck at math. And every time I had to do a math test, this inner voice would come up, you suck at math, you're going to fail, this is going to be terrible. And my whole body, I would be filled with anxiety and stress about it. And years later, when I went to university, and for some reason, I don't know why, but one of the subjects I studied was statistics. It was kind of a minor part of one of my courses. And if you know anything about that subject, you have to do advanced, well, to me, advanced like calculus and, kind of integration and all of these kinds of things. And I would break out in a cold sweat in those classes. And coming up to our final exams, I just thought, I'm screwed. There's no way I'm going to get through this. And I remember a good friend of mine at the time who had no problem with mathematics and really enjoyed it, said to me, "Well, why don't you come over to my house and like we'll talk about it." So we're going over to this person's house, and he made me a cup of tea, because that's, in Ireland everyone drinks tea all times of the day with lots of milk, and sat down at the kitchen table and had a bit of a chat. And then he said, okay, well, let's open the book. And so we got the statistics book. I still remember the cover. It was this bright orange cover. And he walked me through the first page. And I was like, okay, got it. Walked me through the second page and then the third page. And we went through the first like 30 pages or so of the book, the first chapter. And I remember thinking, this is easy. Like, this is just like logic, let's say. And the thing is, I had this person, this dear friend who was, they weren't even trying to be kind. They were just being a friend. And there was like a lightness to it. And they were not trying to prove anything to me. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them. So it completely unlocked that for me. I will say it healed it for me. I got an A in that subject in my exam because, if you know mathematics, then, you know it. And years later, I was at an interfaith event, and let's just say this person happened to be there. And I was very happy to see them. I was like, wow, this is so great. And so after the event, and I was representing from a Buddhist perspective, and they were representing from another tradition. And they said a few words, and then I went up to them afterwards, and I said, like, oh, it's so great to see you. I was in your class, back in the day. And they were like, yeah, hello, nice to meet you. And I just realized that this was just a very unhappy person who, and I experienced this person the same way as I did as a kid, and inherited some stories. So I guess what I'm offering, or in the invitation here, is oftentimes we carry these ideas that are not ours, and finding ways to cultivate some of that friendship and gentleness towards ourselves, and maybe gently start to melt some of those ideas. I will say I'm not crazy about math these days anymore anyway, but but I don't no longer have a mental block about it, and I know if I needed to learn it more, I could. So I wanted to talk then about how we might use this idea of gentleness, because I really feel, for me, it's become a bit of a key when I'm feeling a little bit stuck, when I'm struggling, or that energy is there. This has become a bit of a key to unlock things. And so if I think about aspects of our practice and how it helps unlock it for me, and I wanted to talk about Zazen first. And, when I first encountered, I will say, I think humor is very helpful as a part, when I think of gentleness and, kindness. So I thought Dogen was a bit of a comedian when I first encountered his writings. And I actually thought that, so he has this phrase, he says, the Zazen I speak of is not meditation practice. It is simply the Dharma gate of joyful ease, from his fascicle Fukan Zazengi. That's often translated as, the gate, the gate of bliss and repose. And I thought, this is some kind of sick joke, because my experience of Zazen was not joyful ease or bliss and repose, at least at the beginning, and even today sometimes. So I thought this is obviously, so he's trying to be funny. And what I've learned since is that, of course, when I approach practice in service to an inner critic, or a project of, being perfect or self-improvement, it becomes really hard. And I remember at one point, this teacher that I used to listen to in a different tradition and everything, and they would talk about sitting through pain, and just sit through the pain, and be the pain, and breathe through the pain, and just let it permeate your body. And so I was like, okay, I guess that's good advice. And at some point, I remember I listened to another talk of theirs, and they were sitting in a chair, and they had injured their knee from sitting through the pain. So I, I remember sitting in a retreat myself during COVID at home, and sitting on my zafu, and then at some point, feeling various pains, and then that's some voice in me came up, well, just be with it and let it just be there. And then another voice came in, and it's like, well, is that really necessary? And is that helpful? And I gave myself permission to move, and then for the next session, I gave myself permission to sit in the chair. And I was convinced I was sinning against the patriarchs of Zen by not sitting, serenely on a zafu. And I love to sit on a zafu, but I have a much more flexible approach to practice, and I'm, want to take care of my body. So, we should take care of ourselves and it's not about punishing ourselves. So one thing that's helped me with this is changing the metaphor, even when I sit on a cushion, to sometimes like to ask folks this, does it who feels like they don't know how to take a bath or relax in a bath or a hot tub? Or who feels like they suck at sitting in an armchair in front of an open fire having a nice warm cup of tea? Very few people put their hand up. And if you ask a few questions related, usually somebody has something that they kind of they're like, yeah, I can do that. And so what I'd like to do is change the metaphor of practice. And it's really just like settling into a comfy armchair just to be here for a little while, just to be still. Just like settling into a bathtub at the end of a long day. Just being here for a few minutes. What I've come to really appreciate about our very simple practice is that it has this really gentle quality when we can allow that to be present. And for me, it's become this container in which we can really meet ourselves, this really gentle, intimate space where, our inner cast of characters can be bathed in moonlight. And it seems to be a way in which, as that happens, a softening can occur. There's a quote from Joyce that I like, which kind of speaks to this, where he says, we sit through, as we sit, we walk through ourselves, meeting robbers, ghosts, giants, old men, young women, wives, widowers, brothers in love, but always meeting ourselves. And he has another quote that I find really interesting, because I think of the inner critic as a tyrant. For Tim used that word. He says, secrets, silent, stony, sit in the dark palaces of our hearts. Secrets, weary of their tyranny, tyrants, willing to be dethroned. So, one of the things that struck me is, this inner critic, or those parts of ourselves, they're kind of there because they think they need to be there. They need to help. Bad stuff's going to happen. So if they're there and keeping an eye on things, everything's going to be okay. And sometimes we have to be very firm and very clear and have a very clear boundary internally and externally. But it seems like as we cultivate some gentleness towards ourselves and our agency, that we can, really start to find some grace and some ease with these. So the other thing I've been exploring lately kind of relates to this is I'm really curious about what was it like before the Buddha and before all of these great spiritual teachers and before all of these institutions, and like how did we as humans attune to just being here in this heart, body, mind, and how, because it seems like since the beginning of time, there's been this innate draw and need to be still and to attune to some sense of something much bigger, more fully present than we can articulate in words. And so I've kind of got interested in the word paganism, not in the sense that it's sometimes used today, but rather if we think about practices and ways of orienting to the world that predate all of these traditions. Not that there's anything, we have all of these wonderful traditions, but I get really curious about this idea that there's a birthright that we all have, that is this sense of being connected to ourselves and to the world, and having agency and the ability to move gracefully through the world and to be of service. But that it's something that predates all of this. And what I find interesting about the word pagan, and I'm using it in the sense of like honoring the sacred that's all around us, before institutions emerged, before any of these things. And this idea of learning from what's around us, from nature, seeing the sacred in the hill right in front of us, or the lake outside the door, or the bog somewhere beyond the forest, attuning to our sense of place and sense of being here. So there's a whole other talk that this is a whole other talk that I'm exploring right now, but I want to share with you just a short poem by an Irish female poet that speaks to this, and I won't say more on it because it is a big topic. But she talks about she grew up in the shadow of this mountain, and has really been exploring some of these themes. So, and I will say one other thing. I found in my practice the idea of magic a little bit helpful. And think of our practice, we do all sorts of like grand wizard and wizardess type things. We bow and we walk in a certain way, and there's some like beautiful theater and sort of I think there's something really precious about that. So there's a little bit in this where if you ever did that thing when you were a kid where you're out somewhere and you find a special pebble or like a leaf, and you put it in your pocket, or you bring it home and you put it in a special place. So a little bit of what she says here speaks to that. So this poem is called Bog Medicine. And she says, "Drink these star-leafed nettles, and keep in your purse a fern. To become invisible, say your harm to the hill. This hill is pagan. This hill is hill. It will answer in bog tongue and occasional fire, burning back the earth along the heather stream, despite bald heels of rock, despite the kissy mink, despite a saintly air, until the stream runs dark with what needs to blacken out of you." So one other couple of other things I wanted to share, and just before I move to a close. I think a lot about how do we apply this to the world, and as we move through the world. And since I've been young, I've thought a lot about social issues and how do I show up in that space, and how can I really turn towards that, and from early days, inspired by practitioners and teachers who've done that, and of course like Engaged Buddhism and various other approaches around that. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I wanted to share a couple of things that I found helpful. So there's a writer many of you will have heard of called Bell Hooks, and she has a wonderful book called All About Love, and just a really interesting way of bringing agency and sense of aspiration to help things be better, but in a way that doesn't seem to be seems to foster something helpful and generative. So I'm going to share this short few words from her. She says, "The moment we choose to love," and so she's using this word love, and I guess I'm playing with this word love as another manifestation of gentleness. So the moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. And then that word love, she unpacks it, and she goes into a lot of detail on it. And it's a great book because she shares a lot of her own story, but she breaks it down into I'm not going to go into each of these, but she says love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. So it's helped me as I think about how do I attend to and attune to the greater world around us, and I feel really a sense of responsibility actually around that, and I don't always know what to do, but this idea of, well, I care, I make a commitment to do something, knowledge, like how can I learn and like educate myself about it, and then how can I move through it with respect and seek to build trust as I do so. So for me, that's kind of applying this concept of gentleness to that space. And then when I think about effort and you know, our eightfold path, and sometimes the word is used, you know, right effort, or you know, maybe skillful. And what's helped me, especially with that word effort, is to think about gentle effort, gentle persistence. How do we continue to continue? Angela Davis has a quote that I find helpful, which is, sometimes we have to do the work, even though we don't yet see a glimmer on the horizon that it's actually going to be possible. So sometimes we just do a thing. Sometimes we just sit on our cushion when we don't quite feel like it. And then afterwards we're like, oh, I always sort of feel better when I do that, but I don't always feel like it when at the start. And this idea of this gentle returning, and giving ourselves some grace and some humor with, we always forget to remember. At least I do. I always forget to remember. And so remembering to remember seems to be helpful. And I forget continuously, and then yet I remember continuously. Thankfully, you know, we have friends and others who can support us on this journey. So, you know, if you've ever had the experience of going down a blind alley yet again and wondered, how did I get here again? And, you know, how might we bring a little bit of humor and lightness to that and gentleness to it? I remember practicing Tai Chi for a little while, and one of the things I struggled with, but then I got it, was because I'd done martial arts before, and so there's a way in which we were guided to move. And I was used to bringing a lot of like strong energy because, you know, martial arts. And I kept being told, and, you know, we were told to hold our hands a certain way. So I could hold my arm, and I kind of like, sort of like, almost like want to lock it into place and like get my fingers in the right position. And the person kept coming over and gently saying, yeah, just like soften, and just, yeah. And these micro little changes where they would just like loosen and like let soften and kind of just let settle. So, you know, when I think about our practice, and one of the things I love about it is it's a body-based practice. And so how we can continually notice those ways in which we're sort of like holding on, and can, you know, for me, sometimes that image of moonlight is really helpful, just to kind of like, there's a sort of a soft, not harsh quality of attention, and you know, channeling those kind of kind elders that help with that. That's been a really helpful thing for me, imagining these figures, kind folks, whether they're real or imaginary. For me, the figure of Kanzeon has been a really powerful archetypal figure, and the mantra of Kanzeon, you know, the 10-line mantra of Kanzeon, it's kind of been an ongoing practice for me. And sometimes when I'm chanting that practice, and I imagine just this person there, you know, she's walking with me and laughing, and just, you know, kind of like singing along and kind of being silly and playful. And so that's been helpful. And just remembering moments in our lives where we've experienced that kind of kindness or gentleness. I traveled to Dharamsala with my Tibetan teacher for teachings by the Dalai Lama. So it's like a 5-week prayer festival every year. And it's a basic prayer festival, but basically weeks of teachings. And then after, you know, we would kind of, you know, be eating and meeting people, and just, you know, just really hanging out in Dharamsala. And I remember being brought to meet this elderly monk, this old friend of my teacher's, who lived in this like little 1-bedroom, we might call it a studio. So there's a bed in the corner and a little fridge and a little stove on top of the fridge. And this person didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Tibetan. But I do remember offering me some yogurt, some homemade yogurt that they had made. And it's hard to describe just the palpable wave of tenderness and gentleness I experienced in that simple gesture. Because, of course, this person who had spent their entire life really soaking in all of this, and just how that came across in this very, very simple gesture, and the gentleness of the offer, and even the physical movement of the handing of the yogurt, and no pomp and ceremony, no, nothing extra, but just a really, really vivid sense of that. So I'm struggling to attune to that in myself, remembering those things, remembering my grandmother who sewed my busted sleeve of my jacket when I was in my 20s and kind of in college, and I thought it was cool. And she was like, "Well, would you like me to fix that for you, dear?" And I'm like, "That's kind of cool." And she's like, "Well, I can fix it." And I'm like, "Okay." So I left it with her, and then she fixed it, and I was like, "Oh, this actually feels better. I feel like, feel good about it." So, remembering those things can be another way in that I've found really helpful. I'll just say one or two more things. When I think about the Heart Sutra, I love the Heart Sutra. It's got a lot of no in it. I will say that. There's a lot of no in the Heart Sutra. It's not a lot of yes. Actually, there is a lot of yes, but it's kind of hidden. And so I first encountered the Heart Sutra being chanted in a Zen center in Sino-Japanese. And it stuck with me. It's kind of my very first Zen encounter. And so I still chanted in Sino-Japanese that, Hanya Shingyo. But when I look at the English translation, what's really helped me is, well, I like to play with the title. I like to call it the Healing Heartbreak Sutra. Because goodness, doesn't it seem like everyone, to be human is to have a little bit or a lot of heartbreak. And so thinking of it as sutra that heals our heartbreak. And what's helped me is to imagine the person who is sharing a Heart Sutra. So it's first of all, we know it's the Buddha of compassion. So whether we imagine, in this case, it's a male Buddha figure, we imagine whatever figure we want, or we just imagine someone really dear to us, and they're not like saying like no, 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 no. They're saying, "Oh, sweetheart, it just doesn't exist the way you think it does. It's just not like that. It's like this. Yes, you have eyes, but they're just not quite the way you take them to be." So even that phrase, therefore know the prajna paramita as a great miraculous mantra. I like to think they're saying, like, just don't worry, like bogeymen don't exist. And, only love can conquer fear. And, without hindrance, of course, there's no fear. I love Nina Simone's quote. I'll tell you what freedom is to me, no fear. And this, that last part of the Heart Sutra, know the prajna paramita is a great miraculous mantra. I'm not going to read it, that part, but paraphrasing, like, no, this is a miraculous or a magic mantra. It's a mantra of light and love, a magic mantra without compare. It removes all fear and suffering, heals all broken hearts, and proclaim heart mind is healed, fully healed, complete wholeness is here. Rejoice. So finding playful ways and attuning to, like, it's not about this, and there's a gentle way in that for me has helped unlock some of these things. So I just want to finish up with for me, a lot of practice has been the journey from this part of my body to the rest of, discovering, oh my goodness, there's this whole other, all of this is here too. And like below the neck, there's all of this other stuff, and there's feelings. A fun fact, we're going to go and see Inside Out too. So with another family, and so it's a good day to do that. And yeah, feelings and things in our body that are there. And so how this really gentle practice that we have, and if we can approach it with that gentle spirit, these things can sort of start to kind of come up in ways that that a healing can happen without us having to make anything happen. And so it's why I'm also a little bit cautious. Sometimes sitting intensely for long periods of time is a beautiful, beautiful practice. Just have to kind of mind ourselves a little bit and just be sure, like, we're taking care of ourselves, and because it can bring up big things. So really, really thoughtful about wanting to just, be careful about that, and yeah, bring that spirit of gentleness to it, and knowing our limits and our boundaries, and not being pushed by our inner critic. So what I want to finish up with is related to this, that the theme of homecoming has been really helpful for me, and this sense of the home that's always here. Living in the US now, living in California, living in Oakland. I feel very at home here in many ways, and then sometimes I miss, historic home, but then I feel like I have multiple homes. And so this sense of that home is right here, and that this metaphor of homecoming, and kind of like the remembering that wherever we are, home is. And so, well, there's this, and I think sometimes when I feel that sense of home, so another Irish poet, William Butler Yeats, has this quote that he says, "Nothing but stillness can remain when hearts are full of their own sweetness, bodies of their loveliness." So I want to leave you with another short poem by John O'Donoghue. The poem is called Blessing. It's got an Irish word which is bannacht, which just means blessing. And I like the idea of blessing is not that we have to be blessed by some person. That blessing is something we can bless our experience. We can bless each moment with our gentle attention. We can bless each other with our presence. So in this poem, he uses a word I want to just mention. He uses the word currach, and a currach is in the west of Ireland. There's 3 islands called the Aran Islands, and in other parts of the west of Ireland. And they used to make these boats, and they still make them out of slats of wood, and so it's stretched cowhide over the slats of wood and painted with tar. So they're very light and very maneuverable. They're very fragile. So if they hit a rock, it'll tear through the canvas or the cowhide really quickly. So he uses that word currach here, and says, "I'll leave you with this. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the grey window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colours, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life." So thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Yes, we have some time for comments or questions. So quotes and songs and poems.
Alan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Kathleen Heaney here.
Hi, Kathleen.
I loved all the poems you read. They were just beautiful, and I loved hearing your voice. I'm wondering, I actually sent you an email as well, but can I get a list of those poems? Are you able to email me those poems?
Of course. Be happy to.
Thank you. Yeah, they were just beautiful.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I wish I could claim credit for writing them all.
Alan, can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
Yeah, Dave Kursky. Can you tell me the name of that French psychoanalyst? You mentioned it, and then I was looking in the chat to see if it was there, but
Yes. It's Anne Dufour-Montel, and the book is called The Power of Gentleness.
thanks, Alan.
Of course.
The gentleness you speak of, you find that in Joyce, in Ulysses?
In Joyce and Ulysses? Was that the question?
Yes. Could you hear it?
Yeah. Do I find that gentleness? Is that? Do I find that in Joyce and Ulysses?
Yeah, the gentleness
Hmm. It depends. If I'm reading from a place of, I'm gonna figure this out, damn it, and I'm gonna explain it really clearly to somebody else. No, but in the same way when I read Dogen or any text, but if I approach it from a place of childlike curiosity and playfulness, and not to make it too grand, you know what I mean? Yes, absolutely. Especially so rich, and so many characters, such a cast of characters, and combination of very structured things, and then just lots of random freeform literary jazz, or literary hip hop. He didn't know about hip hop back then, but I like to think Joyce would have dug that. So yes, I do. And I would say there's a gentleness of language. Maybe I'm biased, of course, because I'm from Ireland, but the Irish language, which I grew up learning, it's not direct. It's very indirect. So it has this very passive. Passive is the wrong word. It approaches things rather than like straight on hits them, if that makes sense. And I think that's channeled through a lot of that writing. So yes, that's my answer. And Ted, I look forward to hearing your talk on that.
And you'll have to speak very loudly.
Alan,
Yes.
I very much enjoyed what you said. Not sure what the writer was about love. A lot of people say they can't define love, but you spoke about qualities of love. And that's very important that we understand what we're working with, I think, when we talk about love. So thank you for bringing that to your talk.
Thank you. I didn't quite catch who that was, but I will say one thing I find helpful about that is she talks about how love is kind of being hijacked a little bit by, which is not, this is all good, the movie version of romantic love, and that's great. And there's a bunch of other dimensions too.
I am back row. Who wrote, what's that very last poem you read again?
Yeah, I'll send that. Maybe I'll send this to Kim. It was John O'Donoghue, and it's called Blessing.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Tom. I know we're coming up on time, so I'm not sure what the protocol is, but it feels like we're gently easing towards a graceful close. So maybe I can pass back to Ted or someone in the room, but thank you all. It was great to be with you. And look forward to being there in person again.
We pass this to our co-op.